overcoming evil with good. This week's lesson might appear for some people to be a little bit confusing because it feels like Paul is turning 180 degrees backwards, where in chapter 12 and 13 we see that he talks a lot about works, and he talks about obedience and a proper conduct of behavior, and that all these things have a crucial place in our walk of faith. The question is there any discrepancy between those things and what Paul has been teaching us until now?
It's more like Paul steps aside a bit and says, okay, keeping in mind everything that I talked about so far, what does it practically mean?
The lesson makes a clear distinction that until now, up to chapter 11, Paul has been presenting his doctrinal understanding of salvation, where from chapter 12 to chapter 16, he's presenting some practical instructions for life and some personal notes. What he really does is help us channel our attention on obedience or good works into a proper direction. Because being saved by faith does not just cancel or eliminate obedience, which is Christ-like living. Also, it doesn't mean that obedience comes automatically. So, what does it mean then?
My summary of the first part of chapter 12 is, when you have experienced mercy, when you let God change your way of thinking, when you receive His grace, what does it do to you? Then look at yourself. Look at what God has given to you. And think of ways that you can put this in service. Oh, and by the way, be reasonable when you think about yourself.
The successful formula of what obedience or good works is just found right at the beginning of chapter 12, where Paul says in verse 2, do not conform with the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. For me, it simply says that I should not adopt the world's values as a standard for my spiritual living. And also, I should focus on upgrading, renewing my mind constantly, which naturally, with the help of God, of course, will lead to a transformation of my character. And the last one, the character being my end goal, isn't it?
We are physical beings. We do things. What we do, what we are engaged in, drives us. Paul says, never let the fire in your heart go out. Keep it alive. When you hope, be joyful. When you suffer, be patient. When you pray, be faithful. Share with God's people who are in need. Welcome others into your homes. Bless those who hurt you. Agree with each other. Don't be proud. Be willing to be a friend of people who aren't considered important. Don't think that you are better than others. My friends, don't try to get even. If your enemies are hungry, give them food to eat. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. It does take something special to be such people.
Underlying principle for a Christ-like character are humility, love in action, not in words. And this is what Paul presents in almost the whole 12th chapter. He says, do not think of yourself more highly than you should. Also, he uses phrases like, love must be sincere. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Do not take revenge. Overcome evil with good. These are all practical notions that Paul expands on his first initial statement in the formula that we talked about at the beginning of the chapter.
Jesus clearly stated that his kingdom is not from this world. These values, this dedication to others, this love and care, humility, they are not so natural to us. But we do live in this world. We do live in our societies, and we owe respect. We owe honor. We owe taxes and responsibility as citizens.
The lesson goes in much more details of what chapter 13 brings on, and there Paul also appeals for a proper attitude, respectful attitude toward government and authorities as being God ordained. And don't take it literally that each and every person elected is God's personal choice, But the system of having rules and regulations and standards is something that God supports in contrast to anarchy. Paul talks also in the chapter about us paying our debts and underlines the principle behind it, which is to love one another, because this is the way we're going to fulfill the law.
It all circles and comes back to love. It's in the essence of everything. Love doesn't focus on the works. It works because it's in its nature to produce fruits. If you focus on the law, Paul says, this is the essence of the law, of the part that relates to our human relationships. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. We have heard this a lot, but it only starts making sense, real sense, when we grow by experiencing it. As Paul says, you can never pay back all the love that you owe to each other.
And the chapter ends with Paul urging people not to focus on gratifying the desires of their flesh. But he says, moreover, clothe yourselves with Jesus Christ, which resonates so much with renewing your mind, what we read in verse 2, the beginning of the chapter. And he points out a motivator for that, which in his understanding is that salvation is nearer now than we have believed. What a beautiful way to end his thoughts.
As Adventists, we often think, prepare, as these are the end times. Paul says, love, because the day is near.
The theme continues next week with the lesson, Christian living.